Hey, sixth graders. Now that you've had a chance to learn about Emily and Destiny's ideas for why the Earth's climate is changing, you've had a chance to think about your own thoughts on that. Now we're going to be good scientists and actually get some data. Remember, good scientists always look at data to figure out their answers to questions. And so that's what you're going to do now. You're going to look at data to help you figure out what is actually causing the climate to change. To do that, we need to know about the climate in the past. Now, we've looked a little bit at some climate data from the last 120 years, but that's not enough. To really know how much the Earth's climate has changed, we need to know about the climate from a lot longer ago. The Earth has existed for 4.5 billion years. So the farther back we can look at climate data, the better sense and the more accurate we can tell if the Earth's climate has changed and how the Earth's climate has changed. So how can we get climate data from long, long times ago? That's what we're going to talk about now. Now, we talked about temperature before, and normally we use thermometers to measure temperature. Thermometers weren't invented until 1724. That's only about 300 years ago. So again, if we want to be measuring temperatures and climate data from thousands and thousands of years ago, we can't rely on thermometers. We've got to figure out other ways to know what the climate was like in the past. So how can we do that? We don't have a time machine. They didn't have thermometers thousands and thousands of years ago. So we're going to have to be creative and find another way to know what the climate was like back then. And what's really cool is scientists have actually figured out a way to know what the atmosphere was like thousands of years ago, to know, what greenhouse gases were like thousands of years ago, and even to know what the temperature was like thousands of years ago. And to do that, they use these things called ice cores. Now, that scientist right there is holding in his hands an ice core. This is a piece of ice. You can see it's about 3 feet long, and it's in the shape of a cylinder. So before I explain how they use these things to measure the climate in the past, let me show you how they get these things. So first off, they go to a place that has a lot of ice. They do this mostly in Greenland, so near the North Pole, and down in Antarctica, near the South Pole. That makes sense because those are the coldest places on Earth. And those are places where there is always ice all throughout the year. The ice never completely melts. There's always ice. They have this big drill. You can see it in the first top left picture here. This long piece of metal here is a big drill. And they drill down into the ice. And you can see the full drill here in the bottom left picture. It's about 20 feet long. So top right picture, here's the hole, drilling as far down as they can into the ice. And once they've gotten as far as they can, they pull the drill back out. Now, what's cool about this drill is that it's a hollow drill. So as it's drilling down, inside the drill, it's catching this piece of ice and holding onto it. So when the drill comes back out, it pulls out with it this column, this cylinder of ice that sometimes can be up to 20 feet long. And here, the scientist here, she is holding above her head a piece of the ice core that they just pulled out. So they use this hollow drill to drill down into the ice and pull out these ice cores. Now, what's cool about ice cores, when you look at them under a microscope, you see that they have these bands, these layers, these light and dark lines. And what they've discovered and realized is that each layer in the ice represents 1 year of time. The reason that happens is, in the wintertime, it snows, so you get a fresh layer of snow. Well, these places are so cold that the snow never melts. It stays there all year. So the next year when it snows again, you get another layer of snow on top. And the next year, another layer of snow. And the next year, another layer of snow. So for the thousands and millions and billions of years the Earth has been around, you get all these layers of snow building up. Now, eventually the snow gets so heavy, it squeezes down in the bottom layers and turns them into ice. And because of the way things work, those layers of ice get these kind of light and dark colors to them, but they stay very distinct. You can definitely tell the snow from 1 year when it changes into the snow from the other year. And you can see that on the picture here. There's like light, 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 and then instantly it turns dark again. And that represents 1 year moving into the next year. So what you can do is you can count the layers that you see in the ice, and that will tell you how many years of time or how old the ice core is. So this ice core here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This ice core has 12 layers, so it's 12 years old. We have 12 years of history in this ice right here. If this sounds like tree rings, that's great because it should. It's exactly like tree rings. As you probably know, if you cut a tree open, you see inside the tree different rings. And you've probably learned that each ring in a tree represents 1 year. So if you count the rings of a tree, it tells you how old the tree is. The ice cores are exactly the same way. If you count the layers of the ice core, the little lines that you see, that will tell you how old the ice core is. So, how old can these ice cores get? We have found ice cores that are up to 420,000 years old. That is really, really old. That's before even humans existed. There's this one place in Antarctica in particular, near the South Pole, called the Vostok Ice Core Station, where they find these particular ice cores that are that old. So that's a piece of history, right? That is ice that was formed 420,000 years ago. And each layer above it is ice that was formed 1 year after that, leading up to present day. So we have this entire history from 420,000 years ago to present day, each layer representing ice that was formed in one of those years. So, how can we actually use that to know what the climate was like all the way back then? Well, snow has a lot of air in it. And when it falls and lands on the ground, it traps a lot of that air. And as all those layers build up and squish it down and turn it into ice, you get these little bubbles that form in the ice. And those bubbles have actually trapped the air from the year that snow fell, which means that every layer of ice in these ice cores has air from the year that that layer of ice formed. So if we have ice that's 420,000 years old, we actually have air that is 420,000 years old, and we can use that to know what the atmosphere was like 420,000 years ago and what temperatures were like 420,000 years ago. So what they do is they drill into each of the layers of ice and pull out the air from that layer, and we've built up this series of measurements to know all these things about the climate and the atmosphere from this year all the way back 420,000 years ago, every single year. It's amazing. Now, to measure if you're interested, to measure the temperature of 420,000 years ago, you don't just take a thermometer and put it in there, because that's not going to work. The air is going to be cold because it's been trapped in ice. So how can they use that air to know what the temperature was like 420,000 years ago? Well, they look at things like the pollen that is in the air. So pollen is stuff created by plants. And certain pollens only get released at certain temperatures. And they look at the different pollens that they find in those bubbles, and they can get a sense of what the temperature was like. The different gases that make up the atmosphere also change a little bit when the temperature is different. And by looking at the exact makeup of the gases in the air from the past, they can tell what the temperature was like in that year. So they can use that to figure out what the temperatures were like in the past. Scientists can also pull out the air from those bubbles to know how much greenhouse gases were in the air in the past. So they can pull out that air and get a measurement for how much carbon dioxide was in the air, how much methane was in the air. And we've created these actually very accurate measurements to know the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from really, really long times ago, which has been extremely helpful. And we'll look at that data in just a little bit. But the most important thing to know right now is that using these ice cores, scientists actually have air from the past, from before humans even existed, and they can take that air and measure and get a sense of what the climate was like in the past. So at this point, please go back to your worksheet for this task. You have a little video that you're going to watch now and discuss some questions.